Good evening, everyone. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure that you mute your lines for the presentation. If you have any questions, please enter them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the presentation. This is a 1-hour CE program for general CE and will not count toward our biennial requirement for medication safety CE. My name is Dorothy Fox, and I'm currently serving as the chair for the FSHP Medication Safety Clinical Forum. We are excited to present our continuing CE series entitled Implementing ASHPs Standardized for Safety. One of our goals this year in the forum was to move from just presenting information about medication safety or preaching to helping practitioners know how to use tools and apply them in their organization, to teaching. So we really hope that you get some tools for your toolbox when you leave our learning session today. I would like to take this privilege to introduce our very talented, excellent, and experienced medication safety leaders. First, Kelly Biastre. Kelly serves as a senior consultant for medication safety at Baptist Health. She received her PharmD from UF Health, completed her PGY1 residency at Mayo Clinic, and a fellowship in health outcomes through the University of Florida. Kelly is a fellow of FSHP and has been involved with FSHP for many years, having served on multiple councils as a member of FSHP's board of directors. In her downtime, Kelly enjoys frequenting the beach and watching the sunrise. Our next speaker is Heather Petrie. Heather is currently pharmacy clinical coordinator at Parrish Medical Center in Titusville, Florida. She's a triple gator, having received a Bachelor of Science, PharmD, and MBA, all from University of Florida. She's board certified pharmacotherapy specialist and a licensed consultant pharmacist. She currently serves as our vice chair for the FSHP Medication Safety Clinical Forum and is on the ASHP House of Delegates. In her spare time, Heather enjoys watching the manatees swim in the Intracoastal in Titusville with her 2 Havanese dogs. So, with no further delay, I will turn it over to our presenters. We thank you for joining, and we really hope you enjoy this webinar.
Welcome to our webinar on implementing ASHPs Standardized for Safety. This is brought to you on behalf of the FSHP Medication Safety Forum. I'm Heather Petrie, and joining me is Kelly Biastre. We have no financial interests or relationships to disclose. And our objectives today include explaining the ASHP Standardized for Safety document and why it's important, identifying the benefits of implementing Standardized for Safety, describing at least 2 steps of a self-assessment and gap analysis, then listing the challenges and successes with implementation, as well as applying those changes to your hospital's process. So, Standardized for Safety is the first formal initiative to standardize medication concentrations. It started in San Diego, California in 2006 by the Cardinal Health Center for Safety and Clinical Excellence. In 2008, other groups got involved, including ASHP, ISMP, USP, Infusion Nurses Society, Joint Commission, and the National Patient Safety Foundation. It was the IV Safety Summit that was the first national concerted effort aimed at preventing patient harm and death from IV medication errors. Then in 2015, ASHP was awarded a Safe Use Initiative grant from the FDA, which funded an interprofessional effort spanning several years involving pharmacists, nurses, and physicians across the continuum of care. These clinical experts developed standards for IV and oral liquid medications using both guided principles and existing industry standards to create a standardized concentration plan for all ages of patients ranging from hospital to home. And the goals are to improve patient safety and decrease medication errors. So from the Standardized for Safety webinar series in 2022, the 4th webinar introduced the challenges with the implementation of the Standardized for Safety initiative, and this one was called Jumping Over the Hurdles. ASHP collaborated with Bainbridge Health to review their process and provide direct feedback to ASHP. This table shows some of the barriers or challenges they encountered, which are likely challenges you've probably heard from other projects. Although the survey had a small number of respondents, which was only 35, almost half of them reported inadequate administrative support and lack of resources. Lack of time may be more related to other competing priorities as well. Some other barriers that were voiced included incentives to change the mentality of we've always done it this way, stability data, also medication shortages and product availability, which is a continuous issue in our hospital system, pump settings, and then informatics build and changes and making alterations to that. The principles for implementing this require a review of meeting your patient's clinical needs, limiting the number of concentrations, and trying to use the most concentrated solution when possible. Some things to consider are using FDA-approved commercial products to help streamline the concentrations, operational concerns with cost and waste. Obviously, you don't want overutilization or wasting too many of the products. And then consider how ready is the organization to change? Do you have the support to make these changes? And then using the ASHP standards as a way of informing team members of external best practices. So benefits of standardization, this is a pretty important slide, and there may be a test question on this later. Patient safety is the biggest factor, obviously. A standardized or consistent medication concentrations for patients during transitions of care reduces the potential for errors, of course. It also improves operational processes because you have reduced variation if you're limiting it to a certain number of concentrations. It's a simplified ordering and fewer choices help decrease provider uncertainty and increase efficiency of ordering these medications. Also, accelerated manufacturing because it streamlines the production and allows for formulation of premixed medications when possible. And then overall, there should be less variation and simplified processes to help the whole process to run smoother. As a reminder on how patient safety can look different in various organizations, you see from this diagram that the fundamental safety principle is placed as a critical component of quality healthcare. Then based on the processes and culture of the organization, patient safety can be projected differently. Therefore, safe and effective care is dependent not only on the knowledge, skills, and behaviors of your frontline health care practitioners, but also on the care delivery design in specific healthcare settings. Thus, patient safety must be considered within the context of the healthcare delivery processes and healthcare organization culture. Mechanisms for protecting patients from harm need to be designed with a clear understanding of the science of safety. So one of the biggest challenges in improving patient safety is how best to implement the evidence-based interventions and best practices in a uniform way within the hospital, across hospitals within a country, or even ideally in multiple countries. Patient safety initiatives around the world have enjoyed varying degrees of success, but they have not been designed consistently, nor has there been a standardized approach to their implementation. This is where the checklist comes in. So when you go onto the ASHP website, you can get to this self-assessment checklist. The beginning is demographic information, just the number of staff beds and the state that you're located in. Then there's 3 categories you can review. So there's adult continuous infusion, oral liquid medications, and then pediatric continuous infusions. From there, there's check boxes to indicate if they are used in your practice or if they are a standard concentration, or you can designate an STC at your institution, and what that standard concentration is at your institution. There's a chance to actually write that part in. And then there's an analysis dashboard that has reports and tables to show you how your institution aligns with the standard for safety concentrations. And then finally, a comparison board that you can compare yourself to other institutions, which is pretty exciting too. So it helps you kind of streamline and understand where you stand. So next, I will pass this to Kelly to continue the self-assessment.
Thank you, Heather, for that introduction. As Heather mentioned, ASHP has the Standardized for Safety checklist that you can use But there is also the Standardize for Safety self-assessment tool. And if you're not familiar with this tool, this is what the tool kind of looks like. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the process. So when you first log in, as Heather mentioned, you're going to go through some of the demographics of your organization. And then you're going to go through a series of steps that are going to get you to your next step in your results. So your first step is going to be going through the tool and looking at what medications you have and the standardized concentrations. So you're going to select the medications that you have in your organization. You will go through the tool. The tool will provide you with the standardized concentration recommendations from ASHPs, Standardized for Safety, and then it's going to provide you with a result. And the concentrations that you're going to be putting in are either going to be in milligrams per ml or micrograms per ml. And if the Standardized for Safety concentration is in milligrams per ml, and you add a concentration in micrograms per ml, the tool will automatically convert it to milligrams per ml and vice versa for analysis purposes. And then at the end, it will provide you with a comparison report. Now, this is just one way to get to the end means of where you want to be with the self-assessment. This doesn't mean that you have to use this kind of a tool. It's just a pre-made tool that makes it a lot easier for you. So you can do this many different ways, and I'm going to talk about how our organization did it in the next few slides. As you work through the process, doing your pre-implementation evaluation and planning are really the keys to your success. Because if you don't have a good plan to start with, the stage for success is going to be more difficult. You must start with those stages and planning to get to a good end result. So no matter where you start, whether you start with the ASHP tool or whether you start with a homemade or homegrown tool, the first step is planning and implementing, and then working through your planning stages. At our institution, we simply created a spreadsheet. We compared where we were with what the standardized concentrations were for ASHP and the S4S. I'm going to call it S4S moving forward. And then we determined where we needed to go from there. What are we going to need to do to review the process, and how are we going to plan, implement, and adopt, and then evaluate where we are and adjust anything that we need to adjust. Next slide. As with any project, you should begin with your subject matter experts. Begin with creating a work group. And your work group really should involve all of your frontline personnel who are the subject matter experts who can provide guidance on where you currently stand in your organization and where you need to move. Make sure that your work group includes all of the appropriate team members at the table. Your informatics team members are going to be absolutely key to this work group. Again, your frontline team members. If you have buyers for your organization, your buyers need to be involved because they may have knowledge on products that are on back order or products that may have a large cost differential. Maybe those products aren't even available from your wholesaler. So they are very important, your buyers or your operations managers, in helping you to assess where you are. Additionally, having your IV room personnel involved in the clinical work group is going to be important because they're the ones who are making the product. They're the ones who are going to know what is the current process and where do you need to go. They're also probably the ones who are going to maybe be controlling your compounding records or have input to the compounding records. So again, very key personnel. Your pump coordinators are going to be key as well. Having a pump coordinator is going to be key to identifying where your current processes are. What do you have built in your pump compared to your electronic medical record? What needs to change? And then finally, Nurses' input is usually important as well. And so before you even begin the process, it's really good to do a complete assessment of where you are in your organization. Prioritize your work list on how many changes are going to be needed, how big is the impact going to be, how many order sets and departments is it going to affect. And my recommendation is to implement the easier medications first. An easy win is so much better for everybody because you feel like you have really accomplished something when really, sometimes it might just be a minor thing, but in the end, it gives you that boost of confidence that, yes, we can do this and we can move on to the harder drugs as we move through the process. And then plan. Plan out your whole entire process in different stages. Don't try to do the entire ASHP, Standardized for Safety, all in one shot, because you probably won't be successful because there are too many things that you have to address. If you have multiple campuses, it's also going to be a challenge because you have to understand what is the operation and the process at each one of those campuses. Next slide. Thank you. We did our evaluation by looking at the medications where we felt it was going to be an easy change. And so we started with these 4 drugs: amiodarone, bumetanide, naloxone, and vasopressin. We determined that the lift on our end with these drugs would be minimal, to say. So like I said, an easy win is a much better place to start. So when we looked at all of these medications, we looked at what was our drug, what was the S4S concentration recommendation. We have both pediatrics and adults in our hospital, so we had to look at all the pediatric concentrations and all of the adult concentrations. Then we had a column of, really, is it standardized to what S4S recommended? If it was, great. Maybe it was just pump changes that we needed, or were there other barriers that we needed to address? As we moved through the 4 drugs that we identified, it was identified that we had changes that we needed to make both on some of the adult side and some of the pediatric side. So I've listed here what the S4S standard concentration recommendations were, and then what we ended up with our final action plan. One thing to keep in mind is that the S4S recommendations are standardized for adult patients that are 50 kilograms or greater and pediatric patients under 50 kilograms. So you really need to evaluate where are your patients housed in your organization or within the facility, and do you need to plan differently for different areas of the hospital? The S4S does have some exclusions, and those would include chemo, ECMO, and CRRT, non-treatment doses like a heparin for a line therapy, and then it does not provide final volumes and diluents. So those are things that you will still have to make the determinations on within your organization. Next slide. As I mentioned, start with setting an appropriate timeline. Sometimes the timelines can be a little bit too aggressive, and so you have to really thoroughly evaluate your processes to determine an appropriate timeline. You need to consider what are the workloads of all of your personnel and what other competing priorities are going on in the organization and within your information services department, because they may have projects that you are not familiar with. And so having all of those team members at the table to begin with is really key. So this was just an example of a timeline for those 4 drugs that I mentioned. We started in January and we met every 1 to 2 weeks. We completed our computer build and our validation within a 3-month time frame. We did the pump and infusion build and validation within a 3-month time frame. We had about 2 months for education, and then we rolled it out in March. One key thing to remember is on the day that you do the rollout, you need to ensure that the entire process happens on one day. So your order sets and your orders need to be updated on that day. Your pumps need to be updated on that day. Your team members will probably need to create or run a report to see what patients are on these medications currently, and do we need to make the new standard concentration for them once they update their pump. Then making sure that everybody is aware, and communication. So when you have multiple campuses and multiple medications on multiple floors, you have to go to multiple meetings and make sure that this information is reported out many times before your actual rollout. There are many items to consider when implementing the S4S. I've listed these here as priorities, but each facility may be a little bit different. Your impact to your workflow in the IV room may be minimal or it may be large. It really just depends on how many things you're changing. Are you going from a premixed manufactured bag to a compounding IV product or syringe? That's going to impact your IV room and your workflow. When I talked about the informatics and the order changes, before you start, you're going to need to do an assessment of where you are with all of these medications in every single order. So there's a heavy lift on IS and changing the orders and informatics. Your education to your pharmacist, nursing, and physician teams, like I said, it should start a couple of months before you're actually going live. Then your assessment of your inventory. Where are you going to need to have stock changes? Do you have these products stored in automated dispensing cabinets? Who's going to do all of those changes on the day of go live? And then your infusion pump changes will be managed by whoever runs your infusion pump drug library. And then if you have medication guides, you may need to update those as well. When you begin your assessment, take all of these things into consideration for making your timeline. You need to look at how is it purchased or ordered currently and assess, are we going to have to make changes in the IV room? Are we going to be dispensing a manufactured bag, or are now we going to change to a bag that we have to prepare, or a syringe? How will these changes impact your workflows? How much more time will it take? Maybe it will take less time if you're going from an IV room prepared product to a pre-mixed bag, but then you also may need to consider how much is it going to increase your costs. So sometimes there's a balance between whether you make the change to an IV prepared product or a pre-mixed product. All practices will need to be aligned to make the implementation successful. So aligning your electronic health records, your orders, and your order sets. If you have physicians who have preference lists, those will also need to be updated. It's possible that physicians may have orders saved to favorites as well. And if your organization is like ours, sometimes physician saved favorites can cause a problem down the road, because you make changes from an operational side, yet those saved favorites don't get updated. So always take those things into consideration. We've talked about the IV room and whether your compounding records need to be updated, and then operations and purchasing. So they're going to be key as well, because they will need to purchase the products ahead of time, make all of the changes, make sure everybody understands what those changes are going to be, and then finally address any policy changes that need to be updated. This is an example of some of the education that our adult and pediatric clinical coordinators prepared. So thank you very much to Beth and Whitney for preparing this information for our teams. So you can see we listed what the medications were that we're going to make changes on. And then we had a concentration current and the new concentration for both adults and peds. And so this information was shared with all frontline team members on multiple occasions and in multiple meetings. Before you begin with the implementation, it's really best to start, like I said, with gathering information. Determine where you are and who are going to be your key stakeholders. Do you need to have buy-in from any of those key stakeholders? Maybe your physicians are the ones who are going to give you some pushback. If you have those conversations ahead of time and you help them to understand why we are doing this. Why is it necessary? Because it's best practice and it's the first national effort to standardize concentrations for patients of all ages. And it's an effort to reduce errors. And so this is really a fantastic opportunity for you to work within your organization to make changes to match best practice recommendations. Tell them what is changing and how it's going to impact the end user. This is what you currently have. This is what is going to be the new concentration. This is how you're going to see the orders. This is how you're going to change the infusion pump. Most of it will be pretty seamless as long as everything is rolled out on the same day at the same time and people are informed. The other thing is to provide them with readily available resources to help coach and support them. So if they're having difficulty understanding what an order is supposed to be and what concentration they're supposed to have, your frontline pharmacists are going to be really key to communicating with your nursing team members. The number of pump changes really depends on how aligned your practice currently is and how many changes you're going to be making. One of the things that we must consider is that now that you've standardized your concentrations, do you remove the wild cards in your pump? So most of our organizations have wild cards there specifically for drug shortages because we know drug shortages are not going away anytime soon. And what do you do if you have already built those standardized concentrations and then suddenly there's a drug shortage and you're not able to get that drug? You have to have a mechanism to be able to provide that through the infusion pump. And so my recommendation is to still keep the wild card. Teach your practitioners to program it according to the standardized concentrations. Make sure that if you have multiple medications that have different indications, for example, if you have vasopressin and you use vasopressin for shock, and you use it for diabetes insipidus, and you use it for organ procurement, how is a nurse going to program that in the pump? Maybe you have different therapy types built in the pump according to what your concentration is and how they should be infusing it. But are your orders also aligned with those infusion pumps? Do your orders have the indication? So sometimes that can be a challenge if your orders don't specify what is the indication you're using the medication for. Then the nurse gets the order, she sees the infusion, she goes to the pump, and then she sees 3 therapy types, and she's like, well, I'm not sure which I'm supposed to be using. That comes with knowledge of your patient and also making sure that you do have the information available in your computer system so the nurse can make it easy for the nurse. But if they don't understand, make sure your pharmacists are available to help assess and help them to program it appropriately. There will certainly be challenges. I already mentioned the drug shortages. If you have a NICU population, NICU populations have very small concentrations. Well, what happens with small concentrations? Well, if you have a very small syringe and a very small volume in that syringe, you may not be able to put it into your syringe pump. So what's going to happen? Well, maybe you're going to have to make a batch and draw it out into a little bit larger syringe. You're also going to have to consider stability data. If you are moving from a manufactured product that you have stored in your OmniCell or your Pyxis or whatever device you have, if you have that manufactured product, it's going to be good until the manufacturer's expiration date. But now if you're moving to compounding it in your IV room, you have to consider USP 797 and the beyond use dates. If there's package size and dose mismatches, think about if you have freestanding emergency rooms or if you have fields in your system that don't really match between different systems. And then, of course, your pump settings. Overall, it's best to recommend higher, more concentrated infusions versus dilute when possible. So the overall flow rates do not interfere with the patient's fluid requirements for nutritional support or any other product. Recommend that concentrations that result in small flow rates, like your NICU population, will be take into consideration the volumes that you're going to be using, and if the volume is going to be a flow rate that is going to be associated with your pump. Is it something that they can infuse? An overarching premise for the IV and oral liquid medications from ASHP are recommended that we use one concentration when possible. Sometimes that's not possible, especially when you have different populations within your hospital. So please take that into consideration. And then if you do need multiple concentrations, please stop and think about your concentration differences, because you definitely don't want a 10-fold difference between your concentrations, because that's where errors can happen. So make your concentrations different so that it's not a 10-fold difference. This is one example of a product that was a little bit challenging. So naloxone infusion. As you know, naloxone can be used for multiple different therapy types, including opioid itching and opioid overdose. So as you can see in our system, we did have different orderables. And the problem was that some of these dispensables were shared between adults and peds. And so the dispensables had to be updated for suffixes that would accommodate what we were actually preparing. Again, naloxone in the NICU or in your pediatric population, the syringe volume may be small, so maybe you need to prepare a batch and dispense it in a 3 ml syringe. Other things to take into consideration are if you have safe dose lists, those safe dose lists needs to be updated to match what your practice is. And then finally, if you have automatic dispensing cabinet medications that are on override, what changes need to be made to that override list to align with what your current practice is? And then finally, do you have patients that transfer in from other organizations? So if you have patients who transfer in, that other organization may have a different concentration than what you currently have. And so you need to look at what is your process going to be when those patients come to your emergency department or when they're brought in by EMS. How are you going to switch those patients over to the products that you currently carry in order to ensure that there are not problems in your infusion? So all of this to say, there are many things to consider when implementing a large project like this. And at this time, I'm going to transition back to Heather, and she's going to wrap up talking about the application of the processes and various resources that are available.
So this can be an overwhelming process, but proper planning helps a lot. So we recommend to look at the checklist and start with just 4 IV medications. Think about which order sets do they apply to, and do the entries in the IV pumps align? Get a work group together, as Kelly's talked about here already, a medication safety pharmacist or team, depending on the size of the hospital, would be great. Plus informatics, a representative from the frontline team, maybe from ICU, med tele, or surgical floors. They all have a important opinion and component into creating these changes, and you want the feedback from all of them. Make consistent standing meetings every 2 weeks is probably a good cadence to have, and which helps to keep the team in a consistent pattern. And then make sure that you have support from nursing leaders. It's really a key factor, because they are a big factor in implementing processes, and if they do not see value in it, then there may be less movement forward with the work group, as competing priorities may interfere. Remember that appropriate approval is needed, as this can affect many disciplines. Your pharmacy P&T representative can help with this process to initiate bringing it to committee meetings, provider groups, and filling out approval forms that may be needed. When you're leading up to implementation, get the word out and educate like crazy. Emails, possible online learning modules, newsletters, verbally, and huddles. You need multiple avenues to make sure that everyone is understanding of these process changes. Education is so important with changes to avoid confusion when immediate patient care cannot be delayed. And there are so many resources. So let's start with the podcast and webinar series to fully understand the concept and how to make changes. It's called Pharmacy Hot Topics Standardized for Safety. The implementation checklist helps you to objectively evaluate your medication concentrations, compare with others in the country, and build your plan. Also, on the ASHP Standardized for Safety website, there's a lot of great infographics that you can use for your education purposes. They can be pretty simple or a little bit more complicated to make sure you're getting your point across. So really take advantage of those. As you start reviewing and comparing, stay informed with the Standardized for Safety community. You can review previous questions and pose questions of your own, and your questions might help someone else to fully understand it as well. Remember to keep updated with quarterly recommendations, as there are updates that continue to go on. And if you think changes are needed, get involved in the change by posting a public comment. So we will start with some assessment questions. What is ASHP Standardized for Safety? Is it A, national interprofessional effort to standardize medication concentrations to reduce med errors, especially during transitions of care? Is it a document for clinical people to complain about, a document that changes daily, or none of the above? I hope that you said A. All right. What are the benefits of standardizing concentrations? Is it consistent concentrations reduces the potential for error? B, simplified ordering and fewer choices decreases provider uncertainty? C, improves operational processes, which is reduced variation, or all of the above, letter D? And I hope letter D was your choice. That is correct. Identify at least 2 steps involved in a self-assessment gap analysis of the organization's concentrations. Would be compare S4S concentrations to organizations' concentrations. B, buy whatever is available and don't worry about the concentrations. Compare electronic health records orders to infusion pump concentrations. Letter D, continue to do what we always do. It's too much work to change. Or letter E, is it A and C? Hopefully you chose letter E, A and C. All right, true or false? Drug shortages do not affect pharmacies and how we prepare standardized concentrations. I think we all know from this presentation that that is false. All right, what can you do to apply changes to your facility? So A, take ownership and drive the changes. B, start assessing your practices. C, create an interdisciplinary team. D, utilize your resources. Or E, all of the above. And it is E, all of the above. So we encourage you to become a supporter. You can go to this link on this page here. Take the pledge to support the National Medication Concentration Standards. You can take it as slow as you want. You can, print out the assessment checklist, take a few medications at a time, start getting your group together. You get some interest from different people in your facility, and start moving towards hopefully an easier process for you all as well within your hospitals. And remember to fill out your CE form when you get the link for it. Follow the webinar attendees. Following the webinar attendees, will receive a link to the presentation. The link will be sent to the email address that was used to register in Zoom. The evaluation will be used as verification of attendance and for CE purposes. The link to the evaluation will be active until May 8th at noon. So please make sure you complete this by the deadline. And as always, you can contact Tamika if you do not receive a link to the evaluation, and she is a wealth of help. So I'm sure she will help anyone who needs it. What questions do we have? You can write in the chat or.
There's no questions just yet in the chat, but one of the advantages that I could definitely see as I roam the country is if more hospitals could move to standardize for safety and adopt these standard concentrations. I think that there's going to be not just reduced errors on our side, but with nursing, as there's so many travelers and there's turnover. And I can imagine it's challenging for them going to different organizations every 13 weeks and thinking that it's one concentration and it's not another. And I think that that's just really one thing to really think about in your organizations if you haven't adopted this as a benefit. Any other, I'm trying to read the chat as I'm talking to everybody, but does anyone else have any comments or even feedback? Yeah, we've got one question. So how long do you think the entire process will take? And Deborah, can you elaborate on that? Do you mean to adopt all of Standardize for safety? Because it's pretty big, or to adopt all? Okay. How long will it take to adopt all?
So as you can see from the presentation, only implementing the change with 4 drugs took us 3 months at least. And those were some of the easier drugs. We have a plethora of other drugs that are going to probably take longer. And so, like I said, that timeline is going to be really important. And when you have other competing priorities in there, it's going to slow the process down. It depends on how many products your organization takes on at one time. If you've got a large number of people who can do a whole lot of work in a short period of time, you might be able to move it through the process quicker. But if you want to ensure that you're doing it accurately and that you have buy-in from everyone and that everything is going to align all on that one same day, that's where the big challenge comes in, because there are so many moving parts that have to happen all at once, and making all of that align is very difficult. So to answer the question, how long is it going to take to implement the entire thing? Well, if you've already started with some of them, it might take you a year and a half, 2 years. I don't think there's really a measure of how long it's going to take. It will be a long time, because when you only do 4 at a time, it spreads it out. There are a lot of drugs in ASHP standardized for safety. So yeah. I think each organization just needs to prioritize and determine where do they want to make the changes.
I think, Deborah, you probably also have to start by taking the assessment. Like, some facilities may have 150 medications that they need to convert. Some facilities may already be matching and not even know it. So really getting into ASHP site, taking that assessment and identifying where your opportunities are, and then prioritizing them, maybe setting up a regular cadence or just a goal. To Kelly's point, we're going to try to do 3 per quarter, and just making it manageable, and then remembering to check those quarterly updates to see if there's been anything that you need to add. I think we have another question. What techniques do you use to gain buy-in from your prescribers and from nursing leadership?
I find in general, just because I do a lot of the P&T items, that really, if you show that there's patient safety advantages and it's probably not going to cost more, it's probably going to show a cost savings, then they're all for it, you know. So I think kind of swinging it like, you know, and it's not even a swing, it's just showing, you know, influencing that it's for patient safety and it's probably going to be a cost savings. I think those are always, you know, music to everyone's ears. Do you agree, Kelly?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think approaching it from a patient safety standpoint is absolutely the best way to go about it. And then if you have pushback from providers or from nursing team members, work through it with them. Help them to understand why the changes are necessary, what are their barriers to making the change. And once everybody has a clear understanding of why we're doing this, most people are going to get on board with it.
So I see that there's consensus among the group that the standardization of concentrations is very helpful in the pediatric world, and I would say very safe, much safer for our pediatric patients, and that this will take dedicated people and resources, and we need to keep us all accountable and boost each other as we do it. We would really like to entertain either, if you don't have any questions, I have one for the group. Has anybody else tackled this within their organization or been involved in this process? And if so, what barriers did you encounter and what successes did you see? You can take yourself off mute.
Hey, Dorothy.
Hey, Eric.
How are you?
I'm great. You? Thank you for
obviously
picking up.
in the environment that some of us have been working in over the years, this does become a huge issue when you realize the different thought processes behind what these concentrations should be. One of the techniques that we've always tried to use is finding some form of standardization. I think with ASHP at the helm of this, it provides a great opportunity for us to finally put a lot of these things in perspective and to make sure that we certainly are supporting patient safety as well as, you know, standardization point to point. I very much like the point you guys brought up, and if you read the chat, a lot of us understand that, especially for travelers, traveling nurses, this is huge. If they're used to, if they can find some common ground when they come from place to place, they certainly will be more confident and I think much safer in how they're dealing with the patients. So,
Yeah, I agree. We see it a lot in our practice. So, anybody else? Did anyone give this a try or maybe weren't successful? And why didn't?
Dorothy, I'll jump in there too.
Hi, Charles.
Thanks for letting us know about this excellent presentation. You put that on LinkedIn. That's how I know about it, and I want to thank you for this.
Thank you.
And first, I want to mention that. But from my experience in so many hospitals, if you can if we can be a little specific, and let's say you get support from your head ED doctor, it's so easy to bring up the issue of multiple receiving of patients from different hospitals. You're solving a major headache for him or her. Also, if you go up to your ICU leader and they know they're going to be working with a drug and they're moving it perhaps to the floor or a different area, it's just, I have always found in this kind of thing, and I've never done it universal like this. I never had the tools. The tools are fantastic, but just to start from the beginning with the physicians in the P&T community and laying it out, they can provide so much support. I find, just because of different practices. Of
Yeah,
course,
agree.
the physicians, once you get them on board, everybody wants to make the physicians happy if they can. So that leads to CEOs being happy. It leads to nurses being happy. So it's worth the time there. I have always found. So that's all I'll just throw in.
Thank you so much. And I agree. It's always great to have a physician provider in your corner to help communicate that message with you. Anything else, Heather or Kelly? Okay.
No. Thank
You
you for all
guys,
the comments, though.
yeah, you guys did a fantastic job, and it was our goal today, and I think Heather and Kelly did an outstanding job to be able to.
We're going the wrong way today.
Hi, John. Did you have
We're going the wrong
some?
way today. Well, we usually walk that way. We're going down to Sago today, so.
Maybe not.
Yeah, you're based.
Okay. Well,
So I would just like to say thank you to everybody. Being on the medication safety council has really been a great opportunity this year. And I encourage anybody else who wants to join the Medication Safety Council of FSHP to please join. And, us trying to move from preaching to teaching has really been a concentrated effort this year. And we hope that these webinars are really helping you to move your practice forward.
I agree. You took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a blessed evening, and we appreciate you joining our call.